In your speech, you claimed some Indigenous organisations, quote, want to demonise colonial settlement. Could I ask you, please, do you believe the history of colonisation continues to have an impact on some Indigenous Australians?
No. I'll be honest with you, no, I don't think so. Positive impact, absolutely. I mean, now we've got running water, we've got readily available food. I mean, everything that my grandfather had when he was growing up, because he first saw whitefellas in his early adolescence, we now have. Otherwise, he would have had to live off the land, provide for his family, and all of those measures, which Aboriginal Australians, many of us, have the same opportunities as all other Australians in this country. And we certainly have probably one of the greatest systems around the world in terms of the democratic structure in comparison to other countries. It is why migrants flock to Australia to call Australia home, because the opportunity that exists for all Australians. But if we keep telling Aboriginal people that they are victims, well, we are effectively removing their agency and then giving them the expectation that someone else is responsible for their lives. That is the worst possible thing you can do to any human being, is tell them that they are a victim without agency. And that's what I refuse to do.
So you don't believe that... Just as a quick follow-up, you don't believe there's any negative ongoing impacts of colonisation on Indigenous Australians today? Just to confirm.
No, there's no ongoing negative impacts of colonisation. What I will say, which I have suggested obviously within my speech, is that particularly for my family in remote communities, again, who live very close to traditional culture, who experience the highest rates of violence in the country, family violence, interpersonal violence, they experience that not because of the effects of colonisation, but because it's expected that young girls are married off to older husbands in arranged marriages. Women, we haven't had a feminist movement for Aboriginal women because we've been expected to toe the line when it's come to Aboriginal activism for the rights of our race, but the rights as women have been second place. Make no mistake. Such so-called truth-telling commissions have no desire to tell history in the round. They desire to misrepresent Aboriginal life prior to the arrival of the British as some form of Pasconian paradise. They want to demonise colonial settlement in its entirety and nurture a national self-loathing about the foundations of modern Australian achievement. Following a Royal Commission type process, the Truth-Telling Commission have demands for sweeping changes that would seek to legislate separatism based on racial heritage. The Commission demands that an Indigenous-led watchdog be established with the power to arrest and search Victoria Police officers and investigate police complaints and deaths in custody. Contrary to the Royal Commission into black deaths in custody making no findings of institutional racism, the Truth-Telling Commission claims racism and the efforts of colonisation are to blame for the high rates of incarceration. The Commission calls for an entirely separate child protection system that treats Indigenous children differently to other Australians. This demand is based on claims that systemic racism is the cause for high rates of child removal, despite the fact that children of Indigenous heritage are 9 times more likely to be the subject of substantiated child protection claims than non-Indigenous Victorian children.
So there we go. Jacinta Price has argued that colonisation and colonialism benefit Indigenous Australians. She's asserted that there are no ongoing negative effects from colonisation. She's further argued that if there were negative effects, they're more than offset by the benefits. Those benefits coming in the form of improved technology, improved healthcare, improved livelihoods overall, and improved opportunities. Now, Jacinta Price's comments here were rather declaratory. She specifically asserted that colonisation was beneficial. However, there are of course some nuanced arguments either side. Now, when analysing these things, I think we need to consider both the good and the bad, the benefits and the costs, the positives and the negatives. This gives us a more holistic impression of what exactly happened, and it enables us to better deal with any long-lasting effects that might have existed for some people. After all, some people might have benefited, some people might have lost out, some people might have benefited and lost. It isn't necessarily just either or. It isn't necessarily just all good or all bad. Something can have both good and bad components, and we need to consider these holistically to come up with a more complete picture of what exactly happened and its ongoing effects. For example, the people that were particularly directly adversely affected, for example, the people that died during the colonial era, they might argue differently from Jacinta Price. However, on the other hand, some can argue that Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, and all of the other major cities would not exist if the British had not settled in Australia. So there are certainly nuanced arguments either side. Jacinta Price's comments were, of course, part of a broader speech that she gave to the Australian Press Club. In that speech, she decried the voice referendum. She argued that the voice is not necessary and, in fact, could be harmful. The voice might, for example, entrench already powerful elites. The voice might make things worse. The voice might not listen to regional communities. The voice could in fact harm more people. For example, the voice might push for a treaty. She's argued that that would be a very likely outcome from the voice, given the stated intentions of the voice architects. She's argued that the voice would in fact be not merely advisory, rather it would have real power, because it would be getting funding and access, and therefore it would have more power than other individuals whose opinions and voices would not be heard, and potentially could be steamrolled over. Now, Jacinta Price's comments in relation to colonialism and colonisation have had a rather mixed reaction. For example, Linda Burney, the Indigenous Affairs Minister, has argued that Jacinta Price's comments were offensive. She's argued that their comments were just plain wrong. Now, Linda Burney didn't do a particularly good job articulating her reasoning. For example, she just stated that they were offensive. She didn't state why they were offensive. And Linda Burney would be more persuasive in this and other things if she actually explained her position, if she took the time to explain why she disagrees with the other side, rather than simply asserting that it is self-explanatory and self-evident. This has been a broader problem in Linda Burney's rhetoric, where she has failed continually to defend the voice. She's failed continually to articulate why it is that the voice should get off the ground, and she has failed continually to rebut all of the criticisms of the voice. Linda Burney again has failed to do so in this context, where while she declared that Jacinta Price was offensive in her comments, she didn't exactly assert and explain why the comments were offensive. Peter Dutton was also relatively lukewarm in his response. Peter Dutton did not express agreement or disagreement with Jacinta Price. Peter Dutton did emphasise that Jacinta Price is a proud, successful Indigenous woman. He emphasised that she is entitled to her views about the impacts of colonialism and of colonisation. He argued that people are entitled to their views and are entitled to be heard for their views, and entitled to have those views considered on their merits. However, Peter Dutton neither confirmed nor denied what he thinks about colonialism. It's not surprising that was the case. After all, if Peter Dutton were to come out and say that colonialism was beneficial, well then he would likely be branded racist. It was to some extent wise to sidestep the issue. It was wise to assert that Jacinta Price is entitled to her opinion, and that he respects her opinion and respects the background that she has and the perspective that she has on it. And therefore, that is coming from her experience and her analysis. He was wise to not specifically state his own opinion. Now, in social media, the reaction has been relatively mixed. Many people have supported Jacinta Price's comments. After all, it is self-evident that there were advances brought about by colonisation and colonialism. As I've indicated, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, the capital cities, would not exist without the British settlement. The Australian Constitution would not exist without British settlement. Parliament House would not exist without British settlement. Linda Burney would not have a position without British settlement. However, as I've indicated, there are nuanced arguments, and of course some people did ultimately lose out from colonialism when that ultimately occurred. And for some people there could be ongoing effects. However, that's really going to be a case-by-case basis. As Jacinta Price noted, one needs to consider people on their own individual circumstances. One needs to consider their circumstances and perhaps the disadvantage that they are in at the moment. So to be clear here, colonisation and colonialism can have both good and bad effects. It isn't necessarily just all positive or all negative, all good or all bad. We don't have an either-or situation. Rather, there is nuance. Something might have affected some people in a positive manner, some people in a negative manner, and some people might have been affected both positively and negatively. We need to acknowledge that nuance to properly grapple with this in a holistic manner, to come up with a complete picture of what exactly happened and the ongoing effects. But nevertheless, if you've got any thoughts about Jacinta Price's comments and about the impact of colonialism and colonization, let me know that in the comments below. But otherwise, thanks a lot for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, and hopefully I see you next time as well.